our head of acquisitions and I speak in these terms. You learn the most from the deals that don't go right. And if you haven't done a bad deal, you probably shouldn't be deploying capital because you haven't learned enough.
Okay, episode 30 of the Deal Ranch podcast. Austin, Schell, thank you for having me here in the Port 32 Marinas office here in Charleston. Beautiful office, great little view here. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, it could be a lot worse. Thanks for coming down from Myrtle Beach.
Absolutely. I'll pass it to you for a full intro on the company. But so you guys are a owner, operator, acquirer, a developer of dry and wet slip marinas. All of the assets right now are in Florida, and we can talk about those in a minute. But vertically integrated company, it seems like you guys have a lot on the horizon here. So excited to hear about your story and the company as a whole. But if you want to give an overview of kind of current day where Port 32 is, I think that'd be a good place to start as CEO.
Cool. I think you nailed it. So, like you said, we're a saltwater marina platform, private equity-backed roll-up or consolidation play, and we're vertically integrated. So we manage everything in-house, and we also, like some but not all of the platforms that are out there in the marina sector, we're heavy on development, and that can run the gamut from light value add to wholesale ground-up redevelopment. So there's, a bunch of platforms out there. Port 32 probably stands out in a couple ways. One, we're saltwater only, which isn't, we're not the only saltwater only platform. We're one of a handful. And then on top of that, we've got the focus on really tech-enabled service delivery and redevelopment.
So what would be a good snapshot today? So is it 9 or 10 marina assets? I was reading both.
We own 9 and we have the 10th under contract.
Okay, cool. And for all the on-site, obviously there's leasing of the commercial space and office space, and then food and beverage, and then also boat sales, like anything. So that's all owned by Port 32, but leased back to all those different businesses, correct?
Mostly right. So we are 85% lease income at the gross profit line.
Got it.
The other 15% is a combination of fuel, food and beverage, at ship store, boat rentals, and boat clubs. And different site has different revenue composition, but at the portfolio level, 85% lease gross profit. Majority of that is dry slips and wet slips, but there's also a significant commercial lease income from boats, boat sales, boat service, and other marine-related commercial tenants.
Got it. Very cool. Excited to dig into that. So you came through as a strong recommendation from Jonathan Langer. Jonathan came on the show.
Oh, really? Okay.
They invested in the company here. But going back to maybe your school days, and we can bring it to your evolution to Port 32. So after school, what was your progression in those first years into IB? And then what is the transition to taking these 3 or 4 companies to acquisition? And then we can bring it to here.
Yeah. So I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas originally, which, funny enough, the 2 largest marina platforms, Safe Harbor and Suntex, are next door in Dallas.
Oh, cool.
I went to UVA undergrad, late 90s, early 2000s, and then New York iBanking in early 2000s. Mm-hmm. A few years there, then San Francisco private equity in mid 2000s. And then in 2007, after the tour of duty in iBanking and private equity, I jumped to the operating side. And for the last 17 years have been in various leadership roles at now 5 different private equity or VC-backed businesses.
I've read a quote somewhere in an article that, and I probably have it somewhere in here, but it says, I came to believe the 2 most impactful things I could do as an investor were 1, execute add-on acquisitions, or 2, implement a good CEO or a good leadership team. So is that what transitioned you into? I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, I love that. I did say that. I didn't know it was in the public domain. That's kind of cool. That I think the world's obviously more complex than that.
Sure,
but in 2007, I was in mid late 20s, and that was my thinking at the time.
Okay.
So PE And people in PE know this. They don't talk about it because they don't want to communicate this to their limited partners. Right. But like most deals are non-proprietary. They're sold through a sell-side investment bank. And in order to like own the asset, like there's often a bit of a winner's curse. And it may not mean that you overpay. It may mean that you're actually just taking on more risk than you know, or more risk than you feel like you're underwriting. So you've got to like you have to go create some value from the asset in order to like compensate for the additional risk you're taking if you won the auction, right?
That's a good.
So how do you do that? So how do you do that? Well, there's lots of different ways. Like you can have a differentiated view on an industry, right? Well, that's hard to do because private equity has become so specialized and so industry specific that it's harder to have an industry theme that's different from your peers who are competing in the same sectors, right? You can install a great leadership team and make a bet on management. Like most private equity funds, if you read their website, they all say the same thing, and like they'll all say some version of that. Right. And then you can execute out on acquisitions, build scale, like run the multiple arbitrage playbook. There are whole different other ways that you can create value as well. But based upon what I knew then, and I'm always living and learning. But based upon what I knew then, it felt like the ways that we were repeatedly, consistently able to create value for our limited partners was to like back the right horse, i.e. the right CEO, or like execute a bunch of add-on acquisitions, integrate them, and generate the multiple arbitrage from a small deal versus a scale platform. Wow.
This is not a simple question to answer, so take your time. But as far as picking so all these companies are different, right? Private equity company invests in, they have a portfolio. How are you able to, on the PE side, how were you able to then, or even you as a leader in those companies, what kind of traits are you looking for as a good horse you can bet on as far as to plug into that operation after you acquire a company? Like, because it's going to be different company to company of what those traits may be, but like, or you're only looking at guys and gals that you've worked with before and seen in action. Like, so how do you identify a good leadership team to put in place?
Well, I think it's different from being an operator. Everyone's aware of this, whether or not they articulate it. So there's different levels of analysis, right? There's the investor level of analysis, and I'll talk about this marina business as an example. Yep. There's the executive team level of analysis. There's the marina general manager level of analysis, and then there's the guy or gal who's actually walking the docks, cleaning the boats, and like washing them down. Mm-hmm. They know best, right? They're closest to where value is created or destroyed for our customers. They're handing them the dock lines. They're looking them in the eye. They're shaking them by the hand. They're washing the boat well versus mediocre, right? And so like that information exists at different levels of the organization. Mm. If we want to talk about the investor level of analysis in the marina business, like, that's one conversation. There's also like PE in general, and most of my background for the preceding 20 plus years has been in other operating businesses, not just marinas. So in the grand scheme of things, I've been in the marina business for 2 years. Like the playbook for value creation here is different for every marina, but there's some obviously repeatable themes to that playbook, which we bring to bear on any new acquisition. At the private equity level of analysis, so across different sectors, across different operating companies, I do believe that backing a top decile or top quartile management team is probably the best way to consistently create value. Wow. You asked me, like, how do you identify that?
Yeah, what defines that person? Or you have a lineup of candidates?
Man, I think...
I said it was a tough question.
No, that's like a think out loud discussion, right? Like I don't have a baked answer to that.
Sure, of course.
So let me just riff on that for a minute. I think the most reliable indicator of future performance is past performance in a similar situation. Okay? Mm-hmm. So there are execs out there, and everywhere they go, via one sector or across different sectors, they more often than not create alpha, right? returns which are better than the overall market. And I'm talking about alpha conceptually. I don't actually mean public markets alpha, because most of these companies are private.
Yep.
That's worth paying attention to. If you've got an executive who's on round 3, 4, or 5, and you have the pattern recognition of alpha generation, that's probably a good bet. So that's one thing that I'd look for. Most private equity funds will look to sector leadership because it's really hard to find alpha generation across different industries, right? They're out there, but like they're not everywhere. Within sector leadership, same concept applies. Have they been able to create value in similar situations, similar business plans, similar industry context that you think you're entering into? I've seen a bunch of leaders like along the way, both at companies I've been at and other ones that I haven't been a part of, mostly other ones that I haven't been a part of, that haven't worked out because the industry context switches, right? Okay. Let's say you're a good time CEO. So you're good at deploying capital, building relationships, and taking risk. You have to make sure that CEO, that leader, that they can adapt to harder times. And that's hard to do. If you're a turnaround CEO, right, and you're a risk manager, right, it's also hard to adapt to more aggressive, more risk-on capital deployment, industry context. And that takes time. Like, you get to live and learn, right? Like, credit cycles, I mean, they're happening faster and faster. Sure. Like, usually credit cycles are spread out over years and decades. And so to be able to play like every point in the cycle is a skill that takes time to develop.
Fascinating. It's a really good answer. That's fascinating. So as far as your evolution through those roles, were you brought in at the first one being, Wildlands, and then Exojet, and then Modern Fertility.
Yep.
So how did your career evolve through those? And what was the first kind of C-suite, or the first C-suite?
It's really fun. It's really funny because I have struggled to create a consistent narrative that links those different experiences. That's the truth is that the pattern is only apparent in retrospect. Like, along the way, I was just doing cool stuff and having fun. I think the through line for Wildlands, where I was CFO, and also very active with my 2 business partners in M&A. So we were a very acquisitive real estate operating company. Had similar dynamics, obviously different end market, but similar similar operating model to Port 32, right? Operating real estate. I would say that Wildlands actually was much more complex on the permitting and entitlement side. It was a development company, which is much more intensive, like period environment, which we can come back to. I was CFO of that business for my last period of time there. We sold that to a private equity buyer in 2011. So I was there for 4 years. That was 2007 to 2011. Next one was Exojet. I was there for 6 years. That was a private jet. At the time, the largest non-fractional, so not FlexJet, NetJet, the largest non-fractional private jet services platform in North America. Wheels Up through acquisition grew after we sold Exojet to be larger by hours flown or jets, however you want to characterize it.
To stop you, how challenging was the transition of going for this development environmental company to an aviation company?
I think it will remain true that I look back on private aviation as the hardest thing I've done in a career. It is exceptionally hard business. I don't know if the transition was hard or not. I've never thought about that.
Okay. What made it so difficult? Just the aviation industry as a whole? Regulation?
It's hard to make money unless you have massive scale. And nobody had massive scale at such time. That's one thing. 2, aviation is an orchestra, okay? And if one of the instruments plays out of tune, the audience, who is your customer, hears that the music is not in harmony. Okay? And every flight is conducting an orchestra. Now, why is it an orchestra? Why is that an apt analogy? Because there's so many subspecialties that have to be synchronized and coordinated to make that plane fly safely and on time. Weather analysis and feasibility, flight planning, routing, all the checklists that precede a plane actually taking off, both in the operations center and in the cockpit. Customer service, right? Did the town car show up on time, right? Did you unload their baggage respectfully? Do you remember their name? Did you check their ID? Did you pour them the right cocktail before you took off, right? Were the avocados ripe? All these things matter, and it's very difficult to always get it right all the time. Now, there's lots of industries where it's difficult to get it always right all the time. That's not uncommon. What's uncommon about private jet industry is they're paying you $50,000 or $25,000 to get it right. And so the expectations are and should be high.
That makes sense.
Private jets also break a lot.
So transitioning to modern fertility, or however you want to speak about this, I guess in general, what did you progressively learn in being in these different roles over time? Obviously, different positions in the C-suite or executive leadership. And two, bringing them all to acquisition too. Like, what did you learn? Because now you're sitting on the other side of the table. You were in PE. Now you're at one of the companies. What were those times like? Did you enjoy getting the company right for acquisition or working the sell of the
I think at times I did. I think I've gotten to the point where the outcome is not the purpose. The purpose is the way you play and how you play along the way, right? So the scoreboard, I have to win on the scoreboard to be in the game.
That's right.
That's what we always say. Like, winning is your ticket to the game, but playing the game is the purpose. Yeah. If that answers your question.
Yeah.
Modern fertility, wildly different than anything I've done. It was a women's fertility-focused digital health clinic. So there was a couple reasons why that was interesting at the time. One, pandemic had just hit, and there was capital and talent flooding into direct-to-consumer novel healthcare delivery. So there was a bit of, I was in San Francisco, and this was like the thing. It was almost like when in Rome, right?
Right.
So that was intriguing.
Yeah.
It would have been like, working at Apple when Steve was in the garage. It was a thing.
Sure.
And then what I realized, I didn't realize along the way, but I realized looking back, is that I had traded high accountability leadership roles for niche industries, right? So I was a 29-year-old CFO at a private equity-backed business that we turned around and sold. I was I don't forget my age, early 30s. It was back in 2013. President and COO of the largest private jet services company, by the way, backed by Texas Pacific Group, TPG, and Mubadala. So we had big boy investors, and but they were super niche. There was nowhere to go after that. I could have stayed in private aviation, but everyone who's listening who's been in private aviation will chuckle when I say that's no way to live.
That's hilarious.
So I took a step back, and you always reflect after, any sort of I don't know. It's hard to reflect in the moment. So when you sell a business and you move on and you're able to clear your head and take a break and decompress, it became clear to me that I traded high accountability roles for small ponds. And I said, all right, whatever I do next, I want to go swim in a big ocean. It's not necessarily about the role, it's about the big ocean. And consumer, healthcare, and technology were the three big oceans that I found intriguing. And this business, modern fertility, sat at the intersection of all three. So it was direct to consumer, digital, i.e., tech-enabled healthcare delivery.
What was the biggest difference noticeable to you in being in the bigger pond or lake rather when you made that jump from these different niche businesses to this larger pond?
So it was confusing. It was hard to tell. Why is that? It was an early stage business, so that's a different context as well. Okay, so there's more to it than just the sector. It was early stage, and it was rapidly scaling, 100% remote due to the pandemic. That's very different, right? If you're going to play really, really fast, it helps to be in the same room. That wasn't possible.
Oh, true.
Right? Yeah. This was 2021, 2022. Wow. There was no being in the same room because of COVID on the West Coast at the time. Mm-hmm. And so I think of the different factors, industry, company size and maturity, i.e., it was Series B company. Yeah. And then pandemic, I think that the pandemic was the one that impacted all of us in our ways of working the most. Mm. And so it wasn't clear the attribution to sector versus stage versus, the fact that we're all remote. It was all muddled together.
Wow. So what was the transition? Where are you post-acquisition? Are you staying on with the company for a transition period, or are you kind of, in your mind, are you gearing up to move on somewhere else? And then parlaying that with, what was your transition to Port 30?
Yeah, sure. So I guess, for the avoidance of confusion, I want to work in the marine industry forever. I got here, I found it, I ain't going anywhere.
To be clear.
It's a blessing to be, mid-career and to be able to say that. Found it, don't intend to let it go. This is great. No, I never, at the time of transition, I'm never looking on to the next thing.
Got it.
What I've said to all three acquirers and, at that point, my peers on the leadership team is, for 12 months, I want to do what's best for our shareholders, what's best for our employees, and what's best for our customers. 12 months. And then at the end of 12 months, I need to start wading into what's best for my family in the long run. And that framework has generally worked really well.
Wow. How did you end up at Port 32? What was the...
I think I got lucky. So I had done a bunch of these left side of the page, right side of the page. Left side of the page, complete reset, turnaround. Mm-hmm. That was the first 2 to 3 years at ExoJet. Right side of the page, and along the spectrum between left to right, professionalization, performance acceleration, scaling / platform building. And I'm not sure which sequence you would put them in, but you get the point. Mm-hmm. That was the through line. It was all taking either a small or less professional or broken in the business and building it into a sector leader. Wow. And so that situational dynamic, the scale part of it is applicable here. But the lucky part of it is, I've been unemployed in between selling all these businesses.
That's what I was going to ask next.
And it's only now that I can look back and laugh and say, no, I've been retired 3 times. But at the time I wasn't retired. I was just without a job. During those times, I would sport fish in offshore tournaments. That was a thing to do. Yeah. And I loved it. And with my family and my friends. And I think because of that, and I don't even know whom, but more than one people in the private equity community, when the executive, one of the big 4 executive search firms was recruiting for the CEO of Port 32 role, they reached out and said, a bunch of people keep mentioning we have to talk to you, but you've never worked in a marina. And I'm I can explain why.
So you're excited to start here, but it looked like in 2022, it seemed like there was an operational transition of the company too, or maybe I don't know what a sailing term would be, but kind of resetting of the sails directionally for the company. So you come in, what is now we'll jump into Port 32, and what was the snapshot of the business of where it was then? And then I want just hear your overview of the business
Yep.
as a whole, marina business as a whole. But
Sure.
Where was it then when you come on?
So I think probably the fairest way to like generalize what's like the reality is obviously more complex than the generalization, but I think the generalization was transition from founder-led to like professionally operated business. And it's, by the way, there were really good people here along the way, but both before Fireside, like during the transition and after the transition. So I want to be very careful and like direct in communicating that everyone along the way was, a good human being, and most of them were good at their jobs as well, right? So, but just like you have a different tool in the toolbox to, turn a screw versus hammer a nail, like, people, processes, and systems have to adapt to different environments. And the transition from the founder-led to the team that we have today was the adaptation from kind of a family-owned company to a professional platform with institutional capital and institutional leadership.
So before Fireside came in, and we don't have to talk about your days too much, but there was,
Sure.
It seemed like when they recapitalized maybe in 2021, they made an acquisition of 3 or 4 marinas at that time?
Yep.
Okay.
So I'll take you through it because
Yep.
that's a good like laying of the foundation for the rest of the conversation. Mm-hmm. So Fireside acquired 4 marinas from Atlantic Marina Holdings from Port 32. They carried the Port 32 brand in July of 21. Yep. That's the seed portfolio, the original 4, and they're great properties. They subsequently acquired, same summer, 3 marinas for a total of 7 now from the Walker Group. Walker is a sales service group, which was then subsequently acquired by One Water. One Water is one of the 2 large publicly traded dealer and service and repair networks, MarineMax being the other. So that was 7. We have subsequently acquired our 8th marina in Jacksonville on the Ortega River, our 9th marina, which was Lighthouse Point, and just between Fort Lauderdale and Palm Beach. And then we have our 10th under contract. We're all really excited about the 10th because it will take us out of the state of Florida into the next most exciting boating market that we're pretty enthusiastic about for the long run.
Very cool. So what are all the different levers of revenue for the marina? And then I guess we can subsequently talk about the expense structure too, because it seems like a lot of heavy machinery is on site too. So it seems like an interesting operating business.
Yep. So we today have about 3,500 slips.
Okay.
98% of those are in annual leases. 3,000 of that 3,500 are dry racks. What that means is they're out of the water, which is long-term better for the engine and the hull, because it's not sitting in salt water, subject to tidal movements. On a steel rack inside a hurricane-rated building. I think that the legacy of the dry stack business, and this is my own personal interpretation, was more often than not thought of as boat storage. Okay? You have some folks that will store their boat seasonally. You have some boats that will store their boat monthly. You have some boat that will store their boat Monday through Friday because they work and they take it out on the weekends. That's not Port 32, right? We are on the path to breaking down the storage DNA and recoding it with hospitality DNA.
Wow.
The goal, our aspiration, is to deliver personalized service at scale. Now, I can know you, and I can know most of the members at one of our marinas if I've been there long enough, right? When I say I mean a general manager or a dock hand, a forklift driver, a dock master. But it's really, you can't scale personalized service unless you have systems. Leading hotels of the world have figured this out, right? I don't stay in 5-star hotels often, but if I'm fortunate enough to stay in the 5-star hotel multiple times, all that information is saved, right? And they're able to deliver the personalized service. You look, you're fit, so you probably go to a gym, right?
Right.
Your gym knows your birthday, right? They send you an email on your birthday. Now, most marinas don't do that. That's completely unnecessary that they don't do that. So we're not. I think we are being innovative in the sense of we're innovative against the backdrop of an industry that hasn't had to innovate because it's such a good business model. It's also primarily a location-based business.
Right.
You're not going to live in Myrtle Beach and be a member of a marina in Boston. That doesn't make any sense. So that's a dramatic example to illustrate the point. Because it's primarily a location-based business and because it's fragmented and owned by owner-operators, that's becoming less and less the case because private equity has flooded into the space over the past 2 to 5 years. But because it's fragmented and location-based, the industry hasn't had the evolutionary pressure to innovate.
Fascinating. So, reading between the lines a little bit on the dry storage. So, your philosophy on storage is that people just looked at the dry storage as storage. You're saying were you alluding to the point that you're trying to utilize dry storage on a transactional basis where more people will store their boat there because it's better for their boat, and then integrating now with the app, it's easier to get their boat in and out?
No, not quite. So there's some highlights that I'll kind of pinpoint.
Okay.
I think the psychology of the industry writ large, not really of the customer base, but of the marina owners and operators, has often historically tilted towards we're in the storage business.
Okay.
If you look at adjacent real estate sectors, the investor psychology has some of that coding as well. Why? Well, manufactured housing, RVs, self-storage, and marinas, right? Those are the little niches that get lumped together. All right. And there's hospitality element, there's customer service elements in any business. That's all I'm saying. It's part of the general psychology, the coding of the industry.
Okay.
Now we're not only Port 32, but because I didn't come from a real estate background. One, I came from an intensely operational background. At the foundational level, I believe in sacred hospitality. I think there's something intrinsically meaningful to serving other people, right? It takes you beyond yourself. And if you can do that consistently well, that ripple effect, right? That ripple effect is created in the world around you, right? So think about this for a second. You get a coffee in the morning. You were kind enough to bring me a coffee. This is a really good coffee, right? Somebody took the time to make that a good coffee. If this was a shitty coffee, you and I may not even notice it, but our experience of the world around us would be a little less optimal. Right?
100%.
That's the ripple effect. Now, how about a plumber or a neurosurgeon, right? Doing your job well, creates a better world. And in hospitality, you have the opportunity to do that every day. And you literally can make the world better by caring about your job.
Yeah. Wow.
And I love that.
It's apparent how important that is to your business, evolving from that we're just a storage business to more of a hospitality kind of white glove operating business.
And it's well on the way. I mean, I didn't invent this. This wasn't.
Of course.
This wasn't when I walked in the door. But we're accelerating that transformation by adopting tech-enabled services playbooks from other sectors.
Yeah, wow. One thing you mentioned a moment ago, talking about institutional capital. So kind of two questions here. Why do you think, could be an easy answer, but why is institutional capital seeking marina assets in the marina industry? And two, what does the potentially massive capitalization of the industry lead to, or how does that evolve the more standard family-owned kind of marina industry? So what's going to be the evolution of the marina industry with a ton of new capital?
Yeah, well, we've seen it, and it's unclear I have an idea of where the industry is going to evolve. Safe Harbor and Suntex have done this. They took a fragmented sector. They built a platform. Safe Harbor was first. They consolidated it. They leveraged the benefits of scale. Why does scale matter? There's being big for big sakes is not that interesting, but it's interesting. Why scale matters is because you can develop capabilities, because you can afford them, and you can hire and train and cultivate talent because you can afford that too.
What capabilities can you develop along the way?
Well, think about it. So I've got a proprietary software layer that will deliver an elevated and differentiated customer experience. I couldn't afford that if I only owned 1 or 2 marinas.
Right.
I got to own 10. Okay. Bruce is sitting right out there. Bruce has been in the marina business for 30 years. I can't afford a Bruce unless I own 10 marinas.
Right.
And so I think the answer is what not capabilities? It's everything.
Okay.
Right? So scale allows you to make investments in every area of the business to be best in class, or choose not to be best in class and outsource it. Right?
Yeah.
So that's why scale matters. There's no big for big sake. That's an ego thing. This is not an ego thing. It's if you want to be, why does scale matter? We want to deliver industry sector leading returns to our investors. 1. 2, we want to deliver a sector leading experience to our customers. 3, we want to be a great place to work. Scale helps you accomplish all 3 of those things.
Right. And each one of those helps you accomplish the other as well.
It's
in some regard.
I think it was Jim Collins who used the flywheel analogy. It's apt, right? Scale is the weight of the flywheel.
So why do you think, in your opinion, institutional capital is seeking? I think we may have even talked.
Sure, I jumped off of that point.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah,
maybe Jonathan mentioned that too, but
so there's a slide in every marina equity pitch, and it shows you marina performance versus all other real estate sectors in 2008 through 2009. Okay, the last cycle, and marina revenue was up 1 or 2%, and everything else is down. Okay, so that's why, right? It's one of the reasons why, right? It's if you study the tape, it has performed on a relative basis exceptionally well through credit cycles or through economic cycles. Second, the supply-demand fundamentals, particularly after the boating boom that occurred during the pandemic. What I mean by that is a lot of people bought boats because to get outside, right? So what was a very attractive supply-demand fundamental outlook got even better in 2021, 2022.
Interesting.
And all that capital stock, right, meaning the boats, they have to go somewhere. Whether you own them or your buddy owns them or somebody you don't know owns that boat, it has to go somewhere.
Yeah. So as far as growth plan, and this could be a generalized or for your team. So for a marina business to grow, or more specifically, what is the team's current growth plan or focus? Is it always acquisition of a new marina? And I saw maybe Fort Lauderdale a couple years, may have been at the time you came on, but you added 700 new dry rack storage spaces as well. But is that the business where it's kind of like a almost like you're buying an apartment deal with additional land and you're going to develop new units?
Yep.
Is it that model, or is it just buy and then Port 32 has a better operating business and you guys can drive revenue? So how do you look at growth, and what do you focus on first?
So we've got a 5-year plan. It took a while to figure this out because I was new to the sector. You have to figure out the competitive landscape, because your competitive positioning determines your strategic optionality. Okay, where do you have an edge, or where can you develop an edge? To ask those questions, to answer those questions, you have to understand your competition. So I had to go do that. Then you've got to determine what your strategy is. Okay, so the competitive landscape is the territory, right? And then or I should say, is you got to map the territory, right? You got to go understand it, and you got to make a map. Okay, so now we've got a map. Well, then you got to determine an aim. Like, where's the treasure? Like, what's the treasure? There's a treasure chest out there, right? Like, how do I define the treasure chest? So that's our 5-year goals. All right, well, then, like, you got to go explore to find the treasure. Well, you don't want to explore haphazardly. You want to do it in somewhat of a directed fashion. That's why the X marks the spot, and that's why you have the map. So that's the strategy. Your strategy is how you're going to pursue the treasure, right? And then there's how are you going to behave along the way? Like, are you going to put warm clothes on? Are you going to put shorts on? Like, are you going to be honest? Like, are you going to be kind? Are you going to be rude, right? Are you going to be transactional? Are you going to be relationship based? That's your culture and values, right? It's like, as our tribe explores the treasure, like, culture and values determine how we act. And then there's how hard you run. And that's a combination of the people you bring on board and how well you execute. And now we're down to the level of execution.
Very cool. So does the focus become, or is the focus for the company developing new assets from the ground up, or acquiring?
So that's the concept. So I gave you the conceptual model, and like,
that's right.
I don't think I've ever articulated that before.
It was really nice, though.
I'm glad it worked.
It was helpful.
You never know.
It was helpful.
So we've got 5-year goals. We've got a clear strategy. We have a version 68 of the model that supports it, so it's pretty well pressure tested. So the current assets we own today, between now and 2028, will generate about $40 million of NOI. So that's profits. But like, standing still is not very fun. So on top of that, we're always buying new marinas. There's, between now and 2028, very conservatively, 2 to 3 marinas a year. There'll be about another $20 million of stabilized NOI from acquiring additional assets. Okay. So that 40 of our current portfolio plus 20, it'll be higher than that, but that's what's in the plan, of acquired new assets gets us to 60. So that's what we have today, and we've got the team and the capital to execute. On top of that, there's a lot of potential from novel service delivery models that aren't yet part of the marina industry. That's a separate conversation. I don't want to give away the goose, but we're working on that. And then there's strategic, kind of game-changing, transformational M&A. The industry is such today. There's 25 to 30 private equity or institutional-backed, a lot of family office, but 25 to 30 professional platforms. Majority of them are focused on any type of marina, right? Because there's 12,000 any type of marina. There's only about 1,200 coastal marinas on the East Coast of the Gulf Coast. So it's a pretty small TAM for an acquirer. If you're going to go buy and build Starbucks or car washes, they're just a much bigger market. Okay. It's the double-edged sword of the marina space. It's supply constrained. What does that mean? It means that not everyone can be at scale.
Right.
All right. So that's setting the table. So among those 1,200 marinas, there's a size filter, and there's a market and or asset quality filter. When you apply the size filter and the market asset quality filter, there's about 300 to 400 Port 32 marinas out there. Now, we own 10 of the 300 to 400 today. I think we'll end up owning 30 to 50, but that chapter is yet to be written.
Yeah. Wow. As far as before kind of the rebrand or transitioning of an asset when you guys acquire, is there an opportunity for someone else to own the marina and you guys come in, use the branding of Port 32 and just be an operator of the asset, or not really a value?
Yeah, we kicked that around. The answer is yes, but not right now. There are some exceptions to that. I think the Langer says something that I like. There are no rules. right? So we're creative commercial thinkers. The instances that would make sense for us today would be if we could partner with an existing owner, bring some capital to the table, and also take over management of the marina. That's the deal we would do. The upside for the marina owner that we partner with, co-owner that we would partner with, would be maybe some brand halo, but these are local businesses, right? Like I'm not.
That's fair.
We have a consistent brand, we have a great brand, but it's still a location-based business, right? So you got to stay balanced on that and not drink too much of your own Kool-Aid. But I think from just all the benefits of scale, right? Like insurance scale is a huge one. Forklift purchasing power, like repair and maintenance, IP around like preventative maintenance, talent development, like training, safety programs, right? Like all that stuff takes scale. So that would be the benefit to a seller. And then I think, ultimately, I think it's true that if you are part of a branded, professionally operated at scale portfolio, you've done a lot of the work, okay? And capital will pay you for the work you've done, right? So let's say that a single asset would trade at I'm throwing out some numbers. Let's say a single asset would trade at a 7 cap, right? Maybe the portfolio trades, 150 to 200 basis points inside of that. Now there's lots of different factors there. It's not just scale.
Sure.
It's the quality of the assets, it's the quality of the markets, it's like the will real estate capital value the platform? Like depends on how valuable the platform,
Is.
Can be. Yeah. So rather than ask the question, we're just going to go do it, and the question will be answered years into the future.
That's a good point. What is the process for, and kind of we're at the beginning of that there, but what is the process for acquiring a new asset and rebranding with, obviously, not just the Port 32 brand, but the Port 32 kind of operating structure? Is that a challenge? How long is that phase in of, obviously there are, I'm sure, legacy employees of that location that have the relationships of the people that are, storing their boat or customers there. I'm sure that's valuable to have. So what are the challenges and what is the process of a rebrand or operational transition?
Yep, that's a good question. So this is one area where being a seller and a buyer of multiple businesses has made me a better marina acquirer, okay? Is I've been on the sell side of a bunch of deals, and I've lived it. I've lived the situation where new management team, new capital, whomever like the new point of view is that's introduced when you sell a business, makes a bunch of assumptions, has an a priori point of view, which is some right, some wrong. The only issue is you don't know which is right. You don't know where you're right and where you're wrong, right? So there's gold. There's value to bringing in a fresh perspective. But a fresh perspective that is wrong can destroy value, okay?
Right.
Therefore, I don't take it lightly when I say this. We listen and we learn. That's what we do, right? So for the first 6 to 12 months, we just go with the flow, get to know the asset, get to know the customers, get to know the market, no sudden movements, right? That's different from a lot of other acquirers. A lot of other acquirers are rubber stamping a playbook, right? But the world, not every marina, there's enough operating complexity and there's enough market dynamism that you can't run the same playbook at every marina, okay? Right. So what we do is rather than run plays and make mistakes along the way, we're just really careful to make sure we fully understand. We fully mapped that new territory, right, before we start the hike.
Yeah. That makes plenty of sense.
And look, we own marinas are people and processes and systems.
Yeah.
And plant, property, and right. There's the
yeah.
PP&E, there's the FF&E, and then there's people, process, systems.
Right.
The most complex part of all that is what? The human brain, the people, right? The human brain has more permutations of neural connections than there are atoms in the known universe. It is the most complex thing that we found yet in this universe, right? So like, it takes a while to figure out the people. And like, we're very careful with that too. Like, these people are delivering the customer service that makes our business go. We have 240 employees. People matter a ton. And where I think some of the traditional real estate investors who have gotten into the space, I think what they learn, either they have eyes wide open, right, and they know this, or they learn quickly, is there's more operational and people intensity to the marina business than to other corollary real estate subsectors that they consider in the same risk pool.
So kind of picking back up. So as far as coming into a new asset in rebranding, we covered that.
So I think the strongest brands are the local brands, typically. And forced rebranding, unless it's very thoughtfully executed, can feel forced. We don't want to feel forced, right? So let me just like kind of talk through this and see where we land, because I'm not yet 100% certain what the right approach is. Lighthouse Point, we acquired that marina a year ago. Great local brand, Lighthouse Point Marina. We didn't touch it for a while. Now we have Lighthouse Point Marina t-shirts and swag and merch.
Yep.
We also have Port 32 Lighthouse Point Marina. It's a subtle difference. It's not heavy-handed. Now, if you went in there and said, this marina is now called Suntex, I think that would just be generally worse. So we don't want to do that.
Yeah, that's fair. This is jumping around a little bit, but as far as underwriting one of these new acquisitions, you have all of these variables. We obviously talked about revenue streams and expenses as well, but like, I'm sure there are some assets that are on your target list of maybe, this is going to be for sale at some point, or you have a deal that's being brokered. Sure. Obviously, not every deal you see that's for sale is a good deal to buy, but what are the complexities of underwriting a new marina acquisition, and what is kind of the period of time that it would take you and the team to evaluate? Do we want to move forward with this transaction or kind of make an offer on it? Like, how in depth for this heavy of an operating business or is the underwriting process?
Because we're establishing a longer timeline of pattern recognition, meaning this team has now been together for almost 2 years, we're able to accelerate our thinking and decision making because of that pattern recognition. If it's in our territory, we can act faster than anyone because we own and operate marinas in almost every corner of Florida. New markets, you have to layer on a new market dynamic, but we're never starting from scratch. For 2 years, we've been looking in our target markets, and in our highest priority target markets, we have a thesis, or thematic investment. I should say a theme for those markets. That's why they are strategic to us. Right. And I think over the course of the second half of this year, you'll start to see that manifest itself in capital deployment. So the deal we have under contract right now is like the center of the bullseye of our strategy in a great market.
Wow. Similar to kind of falling in a line item in the underwriting process. In the same period that we've had this boating boom, right, this COVID period, we've also had a very crazy credit cycle, but more specific to your company, there's been a very crazy insurance cycle as well, especially in Florida. So how does this insurance market impact the boating business, maybe from the operator, but also I'm sure from the consumer side as well. But how does that impact the business in ways that maybe aren't obvious? Obviously, it can decrease revenue certainly, but what else kind of are the complexities?
So Meg Whitman, who was CEO of eBay and Hewlett Packard, among other things. I think she's like ambassador to Kenya right now. She has a great quote. Sometimes to fix a problem, first, you have to make it bigger. That's Port 32 as it relates to insurance. Like, our problem was bigger because we're 100% coastal, 100% in Florida. When Ian hit, okay? Ian was the big storm in 2022. Mm-hmm. Ian hit like 2 days after I signed my employment agreement. So, and it was a direct hit on our Cape Coral facility, the eye wall of the storm. Okay, we were closed for 1 day. Didn't file a claim. Wow. Now, why is that? Well, one, let's tip our hat to good fortune, right? You often hear the quip, I'd rather be lucky than good. I think we were both lucky and good. We think long and hard about the durability of every property we buy for the upcoming 30 to 50 years, and you have to understand the storms of the next 30 years are not going to be like the storms of the last 30 years. Okay, so all the building code that existed when these properties were developed, like, it was written for a time, right? Yeah. And that time has gone by. Right. Right? So what's the building code going to be in 2040? Nobody knows. But you got to think that way if you're going to buy a 50-year asset. Wow. What does that mean? Like, where the rubber meets the road? Like, we put 30,000 steel screws on the roof of that same dry stack in Cape Coral the year before the storm hit. Didn't lose the roof. Yeah. Right? Details matter. And we attend to the details pertaining to storm prep and windstorm durability. Wow. All of our dry stack buildings, so the 3,000 slips I mentioned, and this is why really North Carolina south, so Gulf Coast, Mid-Atlantic, and south, you need to be paying attention to this dynamic. Lost my train of thought, but like, if you're not in Florida, you have to be thoughtful about insurance. You have to be, because like the storm's coming every year. Just where's it going to hit, right? Like, I think it was Idalia that hit up in the Big Bend last year. Like, you know, I can take you through the last 10 years of storm history. Like, you have to presume that you're going to get hit and act as such, right?
So the preventative measures in certainly this industry, amongst others, wildly important, obviously.
Look, and this is scale matters, right? Like, you know, I'm replacing 230 piles on the docks at our Tierra Verde location. Don't have to. Mm-hmm. We will eventually. We don't have to this year. Why are we replacing it this year? Because if a storm hits, we're going to be glad we did.
Yeah. Interesting. Changing kind of the talk track a little bit. So as far as location of Marina, it's fascinating or interesting of what's immediately around it, right? There are some great mixed use. There's a lot of apartment or condo assets. A lot of times near marinas, you have other marina or water-like facilities nearby. So how crucial is the immediate surrounding areas, or maybe walkable real estate or potential development? Mm-hmm. Does that influence the performance of a marina? Initially, I want to think that it does, but then
it should.
Okay.
It should.
Okay.
Yes, and yes. So a marina is a gateway to a set of experiences on the waterfront or out on the water. Okay, so we're the portal to the world's oceans that covers 71% of planet Earth. That's a cool thing to be, right? Everything around that portal, if it's activated with the property you own or don't own, makes for a better experience. Right. So you want to think that way. This is where this conversation is why being a lifetime boater and like loving the saltwater like kind of helps. Because when I stepped in the door, I thought like our customers. right? And so we bring a member point of view to everything we do. How does that manifest itself? Man, it'd be nice to get a cocktail after, I put the boat away. Okay, so what does that look like? How do you activate that? Okay, hey, it'd be really cool to get a t-shirt with an image of my boat on it. Like, how do we bring that to life? The examples abound, but you got to think like your customers. And so if you're a marina CEO and you're on the golf course and not on the saltwater, I'm coming.
Yeah. Speaking of kind of thinking like the consumer, it seems like all the different locations, as you say, they're all hyper-local businesses, but some of your facilities have tennis courts, some seem to have gyms, some had pool and hot tub, and some obviously very different restaurants as well. So it clubs, maybe Naples, can't remember off the top of my head, but it's a different club, so to speak, at each of them. So how important are all of those different in varying amenities? Because it creates obviously a great looking landscape and a great kind of feel if you're a club member and you have all these different amenities. But how important is that to the boaters?
It depends on the market.
Okay.
So at one extreme, you have private members only yacht clubs. They may have pools, they have food and beverage, they have bars, they may have tennis courts, pickleball, paddleball, all of the above. I love that business. On the other end of the spectrum, you have industrial, utilitarian steel racks with forklifts dropping boats. Okay, and every slice in between along that continuum. Now, there's a market dynamic, which is going to dictate what the best marina experience ought to be. Sure. And then you've got the property and usually some limitations. Okay, like you can't build the Taj Mahal on a half-acre lot, right? It's not possible. Okay, so that is often the limiting factor. There's only so much. We're not making any more waterfront. We've got what we've got, right? And because of environmental considerations, which are real, because of local politics and city planning considerations, which are real, we're also not making many new marinas. And so you're usually constrained by the existing site as a limitation on what you can develop or redevelop.
Okay. In kind of lightly wrapping up a little bit, I want to hear if there's any deal story that comes to mind that was pivotal in your career. It could be one of these acquisitions or it could be we'll get there in a second. But last couple questions on Port 32, or this part of it. What are the biggest challenges to you as the CEO of a marina business? What are the biggest challenges kind of this industry? And then consequently, talked about it a little bit before, we didn't spend a lot of time on the app, but maybe a part of it. What are the greatest competitive advantages that you think this business and your brand has? So kind of...
Yeah. So two different questions.
Completely.
Challenges. The personal answer is this is a multi-site portfolio, and you can't be in two places at once. And we all have our pesky families. I say that jokingly, right? It's more important to me to be a great dad than it is anything else in the world, right? So dad job is more important in the hierarchy than CEO job. But there's always a balance, right? And I'm certainly not unique. We all are spinning tops, and it requires effort to keep that balance.
Yeah.
On the marina side, what's the biggest challenge on the marina side? I guess I don't think in those terms. Like we have strengths and we have weaknesses, and every weakness is an opportunity, right? So
I think that's what I meant by challenge. Like, where are
the opportunities.
where do you have to problem solve that is valuable, I suppose.
So we are cuspy when it comes to being of sufficient scale to pay for the capabilities and the talent to be the best at everything you do. Okay? So we're good in getting better at a bunch of stuff, and then there's a bunch of stuff that we will get better at in the future, but you can't do everything at once, right? And I think the challenge is to this business, like any business, is focusing on what matters, while having enough like horsepower left over to turn weaknesses into strengths. So we got to serve our customers, right? We got to do that better than anybody. That's the beating heart of this company. Our people have to believe in the vision that we're building something special, because that belief, right, will make them more fulfilled in their jobs, and it will be translated to our customers through an elevated customer experience. So that's what matters. We also got to like get better at tracking repair and maintenance on our forklifts. Okay. And so I think the challenge is not losing focus on what really counts, the beating heart of sacred hospitality, while also optimizing everything else in the business in the right order over time.
That's a great answer. Competitive advantages of you guys as an owner operator, where do you think?
Tech, for sure. A lot of this is on the come, like, there's a team of software engineers that are working right now while we speak, like bringing this to life. But yeah, we're going to have a significant, well, I don't know if it'll be significant. Like, one thing about the competition is they don't stand still. So like this podcast is going to go out into the universe, and, the three people that care are going to listen to it and say, wow, we should probably pay attention to tech a little bit. But I think we've got, based upon what's coming next, I think that'll be really cool. Yeah. We're working on some really cool stuff. Like, we should come back and do like an update in 6 months.
Perfect.
So that'll be a competitive advantage. I think that we've got a great team, our GMs and the regional, ops VPs, we have 3 or 4 of them, are just really good people, and they're good at their jobs. I always say that value is created or destroyed at the intersection of strategy and execution. Okay, and in our business, the intersection of strategy and execution is our ops VPs and our GMs. Okay, because I speak to them, right?
Strategy.
I articulate the strategy. They have to go do it. And that's the layer that I think of our team that is strong, and that's by design, right? We will continue to invest in that layer because that layer creates value.
Wow.
Now, it's not the only layer that creates value, but it's the critical layer.
That makes sense. Wrapping up a little bit here. So is there any deal story or acquisition, we can talk about Lighthouse Point if you want to, but is there any deal story that comes to mind that was impactful, critical? It could go the other way, challenging, maybe not the best deal, or the best deal. What comes to mind? Any story you wanted to share?
I haven't thought about it, but I often say, our head of acquisitions and I speak in these terms, you learn the most from the deals that don't go right. And if you haven't done a bad deal, you probably shouldn't be deploying capital because you haven't learned enough. My early career bad deal was back at Wildlands, and it was financed with our balance sheet plus external capital. And it's one of those classic situations, which we all know, where like extrapolating data from the past doesn't always predict the future. So that happened, right? Like, I've always been analytical and data-based, evidence-based in decision-making. But the timing of this was immediately preceding 08, 09. Now, I didn't see the global financial crisis coming. But I was aware of where we were in the credit cycle. And I don't think I had the maturity, wisdom, pattern recognition yet. I'd been through 01, right? And I was like looking for jobs. So, I wasn't blind to cycles.
Right.
But my intuition was that we shouldn't be deploying capital in 2007, and I couldn't tell you why. It was just a feel, right? We're in the inning of the game where you should be risk off, and the deal that I did, and I don't know if it was early 08 or late 07, somewhere in that time frame. That intuition of that spidey sense ended up like being right, and I let logic and reason overrule that intuition.
Yeah.
There's a lot more going on in the world than we're consciously aware of, and that's manifested in your emotions and your intuition. And that's worth paying attention to.
I think that's a good way to summarize it. Last couple questions, Austin. So, in general, what is the team focused on now? And we talked about it a little bit, but where do you see the future of the company? And obviously, you're going to remain in the marina space, but typically ask kind of, is there any asset class, service, or market that you guys haven't been in that you want to? Well, I guess to answer that, the answer is yes, because you have a new market coming up. But those two questions. So where do you see the future of the company, and kind of what are you guys focused on today?
Yep. So we're focused on today our two most recent redevelopment projects. We delivered Fort Lauderdale a year ago. Awesome facility, great general manager, Matt Domke, does an excellent job, and his team. It's a hybrid in that it's a dry stack, it's also a wet slip yacht basin, and a shipyard. So there's a lot going on. It's by far the most operationally intense marina that we run because of the shipyard component. That's going great. But we're living and learning. Okay, we've been in that business for 1 year. Palm Beach Gardens. We received entitlements from the city in October of last year after a 7-year entitlement process. This is why we're not building new marinas. It takes 7 years to get the entitlements. Okay, that's worth knowing. We're going to submit for building permits in the upcoming few months, and then we'll be turning dirt beginning of next year. I think that product probably gets delivered in Q2 of 2026, and we're so focused on chopping wood and doing the work right now, that we don't step back and reflect. But when that facility is built, it'll be, and this is me as like a fanboy, not as a CEO,
Sure.
Right? Like it'll be one of the coolest marinas in the entire country.
Wow,
so that's our focus now. We're also, like I mentioned, we have our 10th marina under contract. Due diligence on that asset is a focus right now. That's always the case. It's just at different stages, right? Preliminary, for every one deal we do, we look at another 50. That's any capital deployment business. So we're always looking at deals. And then, the customer. How do we serve them better? Like every day, when I show up to work, I think 3 things, right? How am I going to produce market-leading returns for our shareholders? How do I deliver the best customer experience? And how do I make this a great place to work?
Last question for you. Who do you think along the way, you've worked, I'm sure, nearby quite a few fascinating characters or titans in this private equity and especially IB space. Who do you think helped you the most along the way in your career? Who did you learn the most from? You could take that answer.
Oh man,
you want, but like in a business, we'll say in a business sense, who do you think you learned the most from along the way?
Well, I'm always living and learning, and so there's too many people to name that like deserve their brick in the wall, right? But I was 6 years at Exojet, so that was Wildlands was 4, Modern Fertility was a quicker turn because we got an offer we couldn't refuse. But yeah, I mean, I think just time and tenure matters because there's long-term cycles in a business that take years to develop, right? And there's a long-term arc to a turnaround, to a performance acceleration, to a scaling, to an optimization of an industry leader, okay? And so that one asset, that one business, Exojet, we took it from 10 to 70 million in EBITDA in 3 years. And then we spent another 3 years doing cool stuff with technology and customer service and otherwise. But there's a reason that romantic comedies are hour and a half, not 15 minutes. It takes time to develop. So Exojet had time to develop. And I think for that reason, this guy, Brad Stewart, who's, if you're listening and you've got a underperforming company, like try to know Brad because that's what he does. And he's the best I've seen yet.
Where'd you meet him? Where was he in the journey? Was he at Exojet?
We worked at Parthenon Capital together for a hot minute. I was on my way out. He was on his way in, and he called me, 10 years later. Hadn't talked to him. He said, I need help. Are you available? And that's how it started.
Wow. I think that's a great place to wrap up and an amazing story. Is there anything we missed, Port 32, or is there any kind of final remarks, Port 32 related, that you wanted to mention?
No, I would just say that the reason Port 32 is here is for our members. And I hope that we're able to serve them in such a way that authenticity comes through. And then I think that there's something bigger than Port 32, and that is the call of the water, right? We're just the gateway. And if it's going to happen, it's going to happen out there.
I love it. Austin, thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for hosting.
Appreciate it.